He came home before dawn, thinking the house by the harbor would be asleep. Instead, his German shepherd stopped cold at the doorway, refusing to move. In the laundry room, his mother was kneeling on the freezing floor, her hands raw and bleeding from scrubbing again and again. She didn't recognize her own son. She only whispered apologies. They said it was dementia. They said it was confusion.
It's here.
But the dog stood between her and the shadows, growling at someone no one else questioned. And that was when a Navy SEAL realized the truth was not hidden in darkness.
Don't make me
It was hiding in plain sight.
Tell me why.
Charleston before dawn felt suspended in time, the harbor wrapped in a low, drifting fog, the air cool and faintly metallic with salt as the city waited for morning to arrive. Daniel Brooks came home early. The mission had ended ahead of schedule, clean, efficient, forgettable, in the way the best operations always were. He drove through the sleeping harbor district with his headlights lowered, the streets empty, the old buildings dark and sealed like they were keeping secrets. At 36, Daniel moved through the world with the quiet precision of a man who had learned never to waste motion or attention. He wore his black Navy SEAL uniform out of habit, his posture straight despite exhaustion, his mind already shifting from battlefield awareness to something more personal. Home. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, alert despite the long drive. The German shepherd was large and solid, his black and tan coat catching faint reflections from passing streetlights. His amber eyes tracked the darkness beyond the windshield, calm but focused. Ranger was trained to detect danger before it announced itself, and more importantly, he knew when not to react. That restraint was what made Daniel trust him. Daniel parked short of the house instead of pulling into the driveway. He shut off the engine and listened. The harbor was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, only the distant creak of dock lines and the soft hiss of fog rolling in from the water. It was the kind of silence that should have felt peaceful. They stepped out together. Daniel's boots touched the pavement without sound. Ranger landed beside him, steady and controlled. The house stood where it always had, facing the water, dark and still, exactly as Daniel expected. He reached for his keys, already picturing the warm familiarity waiting inside. The front door opened. Cold air met him instead of comfort. The house smelled wrong. Daniel paused just inside the doorway. The silence pressed in immediately, thick, unnatural, empty of the small background noises that meant someone was home. He took one slow breath and felt it then, faint but unmistakable, sharp at the back of his throat. Chemical. Too strong. Too clean. Ranger stopped. The dog did not move forward. His body stiffened, ears lifting, head angling as he drew in the air again, slower this time. His tail stayed low. No bark, no growl, just tension, coiled and deliberate. Daniel followed Ranger's gaze down the dark hallway leading toward the back of the house. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. The stillness felt deliberate, as if the house were holding something inside. Ranger stepped slightly in front of him, blocking the path without touching him. A quiet warning vibrated in the dog's chest, meant only for Daniel. Daniel's hand tightened at his side. The harbor outside remained silent. The house did not answer. Something here was wrong, and Ranger had found it first. The laundry room was too bright for that hour, its single ceiling light casting a hard white glare that stripped the space of warmth. The stone tiles beneath Daniel's boots were icy, the cold seeping through the soles as soon as he stepped inside. The smell hit him fully now, sharp, acidic, unforgiving, burning his throat and eyes in a way that did not belong to any ordinary household cleaner. His mother was on the floor. Margaret Brooks knelt at the center of the room, her knees pressed directly against the stone, her body bent forward as if pulled down by an invisible weight. She wore a thin nightgown that clung to her legs, soaked through at the knees, darkened by liquid that pooled around her. In front of her sat a shallow plastic basin filled with cloudy foam that hissed softly when her hands moved through it. Her hands were ruined. They were swollen, red and raw, the skin split in places where the chemical solution had eaten too deeply. The fingers that once moved gracefully across piano keys now shook as they scrubbed, pressing fabric against fabric with frantic strength, as if the motion itself were the only thing keeping her upright. Scrub. Pause. Scrub again. Each movement was uneven, desperate, driven by fear rather than purpose. "Mom?" Daniel said quietly. She did not look up. "I'm almost done," she whispered, her voice cracked and hoarse. "I know I'm slow. I'm sorry. I'll get it clean. I promise." Daniel's chest tightened. He took a careful step forward, lowering himself slightly, making himself smaller, the way he had been trained to do when approaching someone in shock. "It's me," he said. "Daniel, you're safe." At the sound of his voice, her hands faltered for a fraction of a second, then resumed scrubbing even faster. Her breathing turned shallow, uneven. "Please," she murmured, "please don't be mad. I know I messed up." Daniel moved another step closer. Ranger reacted instantly. The German shepherd stepped forward and placed himself squarely between Daniel and Margaret, his large body a solid barrier. His muscles tightened, his ears pinned back, and a deep vibrating growl rolled from his chest. It was not loud. It did not threaten. It warned. Daniel froze. Ranger's stance was deliberate, protective. The dog angled his body so that Margaret was fully behind him now, shielding her from the open space of the room and from Daniel himself. Ranger's amber eyes were locked not on Daniel, but on the dark hallway beyond the laundry room, as if something unseen lingered there. Margaret gasped. She finally looked up. Her eyes found Daniel's face, but there was no recognition, no relief, only terror. Her pupils were wide, her gaze unfocused, skittering past him as if searching for escape. "No!" she cried suddenly, recoiling backward. She slipped on the wet tile and slammed into the washing machine, curling inward immediately, her damaged hands flying up to protect her head. I'm sorry. Don't hit me. I'll clean it better. Please don't lock the door." The words landed like a physical blow. Daniel dropped to one knee instinctively, his hands open and visible. "Mom, no one is hurting you," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "No one is locking anything." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "I know I smell," she sobbed. "I know I'm dirty. I'll fix it. Just don't put me in the dark." Ranger moved again, stepping closer to her, his growl deepening as he widened his stance. He did not touch her at first. He simply stood there, immovable, guarding her with his body. Only when her shaking became uncontrollable did he lower himself beside her, careful and precise, his presence steady. He licked the tears from her cheek, slow and gentle, deliberately avoiding her injured hands. Margaret clutched weakly at his fur, pressing her face against his neck. Her sobs softened into broken breaths. Daniel stayed where he was, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He had faced chaos before. He had trained for violence, for confusion, for fear. Nothing prepared him for this. He scanned the room, noticing details with painful clarity. The absence of towels, the etched discoloration near the drain, the way the chemical foam clung unnaturally to her skin. This was not an accident. This was repetition. Ranger's growl shifted again, low and constant, aimed toward the hallway. The rest of the house remained silent, the darkness beyond the doorway heavy and watchful. Margaret whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'll do better." Daniel clenched his jaw. He looked at his mother kneeling on the cold floor, at her ruined hands, at the dog standing between her and the shadows, and something inside him hardened. Whatever had done this to her was still here. And Ranger knew it. Emily Carter appeared at the end of the hallway, as if summoned by the sound of breathing rather than footsteps, her silhouette framed by the dim amber glow of a nightlight. She moved carefully, quietly, the way a woman learned to move when she did not want to startle anyone. Emily was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her posture naturally graceful, her long blonde hair falling loosely over her shoulders in soft waves that made her look gentler than she often was. She wore a pale silk robe tied neatly at the waist, clean and unwrinkled despite the hour, and her bare feet made no sound against the floor. To strangers, Emily always seemed composed, kind, the sort of woman who remembered names, sent thank-you cards, and offered help before it was asked. It was a role she had practiced for years, ever since the sudden loss of her own mother had taught her that sympathy, when worn correctly, could open almost any door. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice layered with relief. "You're home." Daniel did not answer immediately. He rose slowly from where he knelt near his mother, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. Ranger shifted as Daniel stood, adjusting his position without stepping aside, keeping his body between Margaret and the open space of the room. Emily noticed the dog then. Her gaze dropped briefly to Ranger, and something tightened at the corner of her eyes before she smoothed it away. "Oh," she murmured. "You startled me." She smiled faintly as if amused. "He must be confused. It's late." Ranger growled. The sound was low and steady, vibrating through the floor, deep enough to be felt rather than heard. Emily stopped where she was, one hand still resting lightly against the doorframe. "What's wrong with him?" she asked, her tone gentle but edged with concern. "He's never acted like that with me." Daniel said nothing. Emily took a cautious step forward anyway, angling her body so she appeared non-threatening, palms visible, shoulders relaxed. "I was just trying to help her," she said. "She gets like this at night sometimes, especially when she's confused." Margaret whimpered softly behind Ranger, her fingers tightening in the thick fur at his chest. Emily noticed that too. She sighed and crouched slightly, lowering herself to Margaret's level without fully kneeling, careful not to wrinkle her robe. "Margaret," she said, her voice warm, coaxing. "It's okay. You wandered into the laundry room again? You scared yourself." Margaret shook her head weakly, her face buried against Ranger's neck. "I'm cleaning," she whispered. "I have to clean." Emily's smile faltered, replaced by something that looked like practiced exhaustion. She straightened and turned to Daniel. "You see?" she said quietly. "This is what I've been dealing with." Daniel studied her face. Up close, the signs of fatigue were visible beneath the polish. Faint shadows beneath her eyes, tension in her jaw she worked hard to hide. Emily thrived on control, on order, on being the person others relied on. It was not entirely an act. After her mother's long illness years ago, she had learned to associate worth with endurance, praise with sacrifice. She believed suffering, when properly framed, made her admirable. "She's been getting worse," Emily continued. "The doctor warned us about this. Sundowning, night confusion. Sometimes she forgets where she is. Sometimes she thinks she has to clean because she's ashamed." Daniel's jaw tightened. Ashamed of what? Emily hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Accidents," she said softly. "Things she doesn't want to talk about." Ranger's growl deepened. Emily glanced at him again, irritation flashing through her expression before she masked it. "Daniel, you need to put him outside," she said. "He's upsetting her." Ranger did not move. Daniel stepped slightly to the side, but only enough to see his mother clearly. Margaret's eyes were still unfocused, darting toward Emily and then away, her body shrinking inward whenever Emily's voice rose even slightly. That reaction was subtle, but Daniel had spent years reading micro-movements under pressure. He saw it. "She's bleeding," Daniel said. Emily brought her hand to her mouth, eyes widening. Tears surfaced quickly, welling over with convincing speed. "I know," she whispered. "I've tried to stop her, but if I take the basin away, she panics. She screams. I didn't want to restrain her." "Restrain her," Daniel repeated. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes carefully so as not to smear her makeup. "I didn't want to frighten her," she said. "She already thinks she's being punished for things she can't control." Behind Ranger, Margaret let out a sharp breath and curled tighter against the floor, as if Emily's words themselves carried weight. Emily noticed, and this time she frowned openly. "Margaret," she said, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. "Look at me." Margaret flinched. Ranger stepped forward half a pace, placing more of his body between Emily and the woman on the floor. His growl sharpened, his teeth just visible now, not bared, but unmistakably present. Emily recoiled slightly. "Daniel," she snapped before catching herself, "you need to control him." Daniel did not raise his voice. "He's doing his job." Emily stared at him. "His job?" "Protecting," Daniel said. "That's what he does." Emily straightened fully now, her expression tightening. "I've been protecting her," she said. "Every night, while you were gone." The words landed heavy in the small room. Daniel held her gaze. "From what?" Emily exhaled slowly, visibly restraining herself. "From herself," she said. "From wandering, from hurting herself worse than this." Daniel looked back at his mother. Margaret was shaking again, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling against Ranger's fur. The chemical smell clung to her skin. Emily followed his gaze and softened her tone. "Let me take her," she said. "I'll get her cleaned up and back to bed. She'll be calmer once this is over." She took a step forward. Ranger blocked her completely now, his stance wide, his chest square, a living wall. His eyes locked on Emily with a focus that made the air feel tight and compressed. Emily froze. "That's enough," she said sharply. "Daniel, he's dangerous." "He's never been dangerous to family," Daniel replied. Emily laughed weakly, shaking her head. "He doesn't know what's going on," she said. "He's just reacting to the smell. Dogs don't understand dementia." Ranger's growl never wavered. Margaret whispered something then, so quietly, Daniel almost missed it. "Don't let her," she said. "Please." Emily stiffened. "What did she say?" Emily asked. Daniel did not answer. He stepped closer to Ranger and knelt again, placing a steady hand on the dog's shoulder. Ranger did not relax, but he acknowledged Daniel's touch with a slight shift of weight. Emily watched this exchange with visible frustration. "Daniel," she said, her voice losing its softness, "you're exhausted. You've just come home. You're seeing this for the first time. I've been living with it." Daniel looked up at her. "Then tell me," he said. "Everything." Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the rest of the house, and lowered her voice. "Not here," she said. "She doesn't need to hear this." Margaret whimpered at the sound of Emily's lowered tone. Ranger's growl deepened further, echoing against the tile. The explanation Emily offered was careful, logical, stitched together with medical terms and visible fatigue. It made sense on the surface. It fit the story of a devoted caregiver worn thin by responsibility. It would have convinced most people. But Ranger did not move. He stood between Emily and Margaret, unyielding, his body tense with certainty, his eyes never leaving the woman who claimed to be helping. Daniel took that in. Every detail, every reaction. The room felt smaller now, the silence heavier. Emily's explanation hung in the air, perfect in structure and tone, and completely rejected by the dog. Henry Miller woke before the sun most mornings, not because he wanted to, but because age had loosened sleep's grip on him. At 72, his body kept time differently now, rising with the tide rather than the clock. He lived alone in the narrow house next to the Brooks place, close enough that the harbor wind carried sounds across the shared fence, close enough that the rhythm of that household had become part of his nights. Henry was a retired shipyard electrician, lean and slightly stooped, his hands still strong but marked with scars earned over decades of honest labor. His hearing was not what it once was, and because of that he carried a small digital recorder in his shirt pocket, a practical habit formed to help him remember grocery lists, medication schedules, and the stray thoughts that came to him while tending his garden. That night had not been different at first. The harbor breathed, the fog rolled low, and Henry sat at his kitchen table sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the quiet hum of a sleeping city. He was not eavesdropping. He never had. Privacy mattered to him. But sound traveled strangely in that part of Charleston, especially at night, and over the past weeks he had begun to notice patterns he could not explain away. It started with water. Late at night, long after lights should have gone out, Henry heard it rushing through pipes, steady and prolonged, as if someone were running a tap for far too long. At first he assumed it was a leak. Old houses did that, but then came the other sounds, faint and broken, carried through walls and open windows. A voice, thin and strained. A sob cut short, a plea muffled by running water. Henry told himself it was nothing. People argued, people cried. He was an old man with tired ears. Still, the sounds returned. Not every night, but often enough to settle uneasily in his chest. On the third night it happened, Henry stood by his back window, looking out toward the Brooks house. The laundry room window faced his yard, set low and often cracked open to vent heat and humidity. Light spilled out beneath it, stark and unforgiving. The water ran again. Then a voice rose, trembling and hoarse. "I'm trying," the voice said. "Please, I'm trying." Henry felt his stomach tighten. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the recorder, hesitating with it in his hand. He had no intention of spying. He only wanted to know if what he was hearing was real. He pressed the button and set the device on the windowsill, telling himself it was temporary, telling himself it was for his own peace of mind. The recording captured more than he expected. Water splashed against tile. Fabric scraped against itself. A voice sobbed, apologizing over and over again, the words slurred by exhaustion and fear. Another voice appeared too, lower and sharper, cutting in with commands that made Henry's skin prickle. He did not hear everything clearly, but he heard enough to know that whatever was happening was not a misunderstanding. Henry turned the recorder off with shaking fingers. He did not sleep that night. The next morning he listened to the recording with headphones pressed tight against his ears, replaying it twice, then a third time. The sounds did not change. The fear in the voice did not soften. It was not confusion. It was terror. Henry sat back in his chair and stared at the wall for a long time. He thought about calling the police. He thought about knocking on the Brooks door. He thought about all the ways those actions could go wrong. He was an old man with no proof, no context, and a device that might be dismissed as coincidence. He had seen what happened when people spoke too soon and were wrong. He had also seen what happened when they stayed silent for too long. So Henry did what he had always done in his working life. He observed. He waited. He gathered facts. Over the following nights, he kept the recorder close. He did not press it every time, only when the water ran too long, only when the sounds crossed from ordinary into something else. Each recording told the same story, different words, same fear. Apologies, please. The unmistakable sound of someone scrubbing long past the point of reason. Henry kept the recordings hidden in a tin box beneath his sink. Then Daniel Brooks came home. Henry noticed the truck first, parked just short of the driveway before dawn, its presence out of place in the quiet. He recognized Daniel immediately. The boy who had grown into a man, the one who used to help his father with nets and ropes down by the docks. The one who left and came back in uniforms that changed color but never softened his eyes. Henry watched from his kitchen window as Daniel and the dog entered the house. The dog caught Henry's attention. A large German shepherd, alert and controlled, moving with a purpose Henry recognized from years of working around trained animals. The dog did not rush. He assessed. Minutes passed. The house stayed dark. Then light flared in the back. Henry felt the now familiar knot form in his chest. He heard it again, the water, the voice. But this time there was something else. A deeper sound, a growl, low and steady, carrying through the stillness like a warning bell. Henry stood, heart pounding, the recorder already in his hand. The sounds that followed were different from before. The fear was sharper, the pleas more frantic. But layered over it all was the dog's presence, unwavering, protective. Henry had never heard anything like it. It was not chaos. It was a standoff. He pressed record. What he captured that night confirmed what he had been trying not to admit. The fear was real. It was ongoing. And now, someone else had seen it too. When the house finally went quiet, Henry sat at his table until dawn, the recorder resting between his hands like a weight. He knew he could no longer tell himself this was none of his business. Later that morning, he saw Daniel step out onto the porch, his face drawn and set, the dog at his side. Henry did not rush over. He waited until Daniel's posture shifted, until the man looked less like a soldier and more like a son. Henry walked across the narrow strip of yard between their houses, the recorder heavy in his pocket. "Daniel?" he called softly. Daniel turned. His eyes sharpened immediately, measuring. The dog stepped forward half a pace, then stopped at a silent command. Henry lifted his hands slightly, palms out. "It's Henry," he said. "Next door." Recognition flickered across Daniel's face. "I need to talk to you," Henry continued, "about the nights." Daniel did not speak. He simply nodded once. Henry took a breath and pulled the recorder from his pocket. "I thought I was hearing things," he said quietly. "I hoped I was wrong." He held the device out, his hand steady now, despite the weight of the moment. "I wasn't." Daniel stared at the recorder, then at Henry, then back again. He did not reach for it right away. Henry met his gaze. "I didn't mean to listen," he said, "but once I did, I couldn't unhear it." The harbor wind moved between them, carrying the faint smell of salt and old wood. Daniel finally took the recorder. Henry felt a strange mix of relief and dread settle in his chest. What he had heard was real, and now it was no longer his burden alone. Daniel did not sleep after Henry left. The recorder sat on the kitchen table, untouched, its presence louder than any sound it held. Dawn crept in slowly through the harbor windows, pale and indifferent, revealing a house that looked ordinary in daylight and felt hostile all the same. Margaret was finally resting in her bedroom, sedated only by exhaustion, Ranger lying across the threshold like a living lock. Daniel stood in the kitchen long enough to drink a cup of cold coffee, then clipped Ranger's lead back on with quiet purpose. This was no longer a night problem. This was a pattern, and patterns could be traced. Daniel did not confront anyone. Not yet. He had learned long ago that questions warned people and warnings erased evidence. Instead, he moved through the house the way he moved through unfamiliar buildings overseas, methodical, slow, noticing what others overlooked. Ranger followed at heel, calm but alert, his attention fixed not on Daniel, but on the air itself, nose lifting and lowering as if reading a map invisible to humans. The first place Daniel checked was the laundry room again. In daylight, it looked smaller, more clinical. The tile was clean now, scrubbed too clean, the grout faintly discolored in places where something corrosive had been poured repeatedly. Daniel crouched and ran his fingers along the drain. The metal was pitted. Ordinary detergent did not do that. Ranger sniffed once, then turned away, clearly uninterested. Whatever had frightened him the night before was no longer here. Daniel straightened. "Show me," he said quietly. Ranger's ears flicked. He moved past the laundry room without hesitation, heading toward the back of the house, nails clicking softly against the floor. He did not rush. He led. They passed the kitchen pantry first. Ranger sniffed briefly, then moved on. The hallway narrowed toward the storage room near the back porch, a space Daniel rarely used, cluttered with boxes and old tools. Ranger slowed here, nose working harder, his body angling toward a tall cabinet set into the wall. Daniel stopped. The cabinet doors were closed, flush with the wall, painted the same neutral color as everything else. Nothing about it looked suspicious at a glance. Daniel tried the handle. It did not move. Locked. Ranger sat down sharply in front of it and let out a single low huff, impatient and certain. Daniel knelt and examined the lock. It was new, heavy-duty, overkill for a storage cabinet in a private home. He reached into the utility drawer nearby, found a screwdriver, and worked the screws loose with controlled force. The door came away with a muted crack. The smell hit him immediately. Sharp, chemical, industrial. Inside the cabinet were containers that did not belong in a family home. Large, unlabeled jugs, thick gloves, a respirator mask still sealed in plastic. Daniel lifted one of the containers carefully and turned it to read the warning label. Corrosive. Use only in ventilated industrial settings. He closed his eyes briefly. Ranger sniffed the open cabinet, then backed away, ears flattening. This smell was familiar to him now. This was what had triggered him the night before. Daniel replaced the jug and continued. Ranger moved again, guiding him past the back porch and down a short set of steps into the basement. The air grew cooler, damper. The basement light flickered on, revealing a low-ceilinged space divided by shelves and old furniture. Daniel had not been down here in years. Ranger's pace quickened. He stopped at a metal locker tucked into the far corner, half hidden behind stacked boxes. Daniel frowned. He did not remember owning a locker. The padlock was small but sturdy. Daniel cut it cleanly with bolt cutters he found hanging on the wall. The locker door creaked open. Inside were clear plastic bags filled with pill bottles, prescription labels scratched off, different shapes, different colors. Daniel recognized some immediately. Sedatives, sleep aids, anti-anxiety medications, the kind prescribed sparingly to elderly patients, if at all. Ranger sniffed the open locker, then sneezed and backed away, displeased. Daniel picked up one bottle and shook it gently. Too many pills. Too many refills. This was not care. This was control. He sat back on his heels, the reality settling into place with cold clarity. Margaret had not been wandering into the laundry room by accident. She had been driven there, exhausted, drugged, conditioned to believe she was dirty, dangerous, a burden that needed constant correction. Daniel stood slowly, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. They moved next to Margaret's bathroom. The space was immaculate. Too immaculate. The counters bare, the shelves almost empty. On the edge of the sink sat a single bottle of body wash, pastel pink, marketed for sensitive skin. It looked harmless, thoughtful even. Daniel picked it up. It felt wrong in his hand. Too light. He uncapped it and sniffed. Under the artificial floral scent was something sharp and unmistakable. Ammonia. Daniel's stomach turned. He set the bottle down carefully and backed away. The pieces were fitting together now, not emotionally, but logically. Chemicals in the laundry room, sedatives in the basement, irritants disguised as hygiene. The same message repeated in different forms until it became belief. You are dirty. You are dangerous. You must be controlled. Ranger whined softly, sensing the shift in Daniel's mood. Daniel knelt and placed a steady hand on the dog's neck. Good boy, he said quietly. You knew. Ranger leaned into the touch briefly, then turned his head toward the stairs, ears pricked, footsteps above. Daniel straightened, every muscle alert, but he did not move to hide anything. He closed the locker and replaced the cabinet door loosely, restoring the illusion of normalcy. When he reached the top of the stairs, the house was quiet again. Margaret slept. Ranger resumed his post at her door without command. Daniel returned to the kitchen and sat down heavily, the morning light now fully present, exposing a home that no longer felt like one. The explanation Emily had offered the night before replayed in his mind. Sundowning, confusion, accidents. It all sounded reasonable. It was also a lie. Margaret was not losing her mind. It had been taken from her, not through force, through repetition, through exhaustion, through chemicals and silence. Daniel stared at the recorder on the table, then at the pink bottle he had carried up from the bathroom, then toward the hallway where his mother slept. His hands were steady. Whatever had been done to her had been done carefully, deliberately, and over time. And now he knew. Daniel waited until the house settled into its afternoon stillness. Margaret slept, her breathing shallow but even. Ranger stationed at her door with the patient vigilance of a sentry who understood the value of silence. The harbor light had shifted from pale to bright, and with it the neighborhood resumed its quiet routines. Daniel closed the kitchen blinds and sat at the table where Henry's recorder still lay. He did not touch it at first. He listened to the house instead, memorizing its sounds, the way he once memorized compounds overseas before entering them. Only when he was certain no one was moving did he press play. The first recording began with water, then the voice, thin, trembling, apologetic. Margaret's apologies arrived in fragments, repeated with the desperate rhythm of someone trying to outrun punishment. Daniel's jaw set. He advanced the recording. Another voice entered, controlled and low, not shouting, not panicked. The words were precise. "You missed a spot. Do it again. Don't argue." The tone did not rise. It pressed. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. He listened to the cadence rather than the content, the practiced calm of someone who had learned that cruelty delivered softly lasted longer. The recorder clicked as Henry's hand had once trembled. Daniel paused it, then resumed. The voice returned, sharper now. "If it isn't clean, you don't leave the room. If you lie, you lose privileges." The water surged again. Margaret cried. The words, "I'm sorry," threaded everything together like wire. Daniel stopped the recording. His hands were steady. His pulse was not. He listened to the second file. The pattern repeated, not identical, but consistent. Commands disguised as concern. Shame wrapped in care. Threats delivered as consequences. He recognized the tactic. It was the kind used to break resistance without bruises, to hollow a person out until compliance felt like relief. The cruelty was not chaotic. It was scheduled. Daniel stood and paced once, then returned to the table. He replayed the segment where the other voice spoke most clearly. He knew that voice. He had heard it soften and brighten and charm neighbors on porches. He had heard it laugh. Now he heard it sharpen. Emily Carter's voice did not sound tired here. It sounded assured. Daniel exhaled through his nose and stopped the recording. He slid the recorder into a drawer and locked it. Not hidden. Secured. He moved next to the study, a room Emily used occasionally for paperwork, its shelves lined with tasteful books she rarely opened. The desk was neat, almost sterile. Daniel sat and opened the laptop. He did not need passwords. He knew the habits of people who believed themselves untouchable. He searched calmly, methodically, beginning with email folders labeled innocently. Neighborhood association, volunteer committee, medical notes. He followed timestamps rather than subject lines. The first document he found was a valuation. The Brooks house, listed by address, assessed at a figure that made Daniel's chest tighten. He opened the attachment. A market analysis, recent sales highlighted, margins noted. He scrolled. There it was, a suggested list price and a projected timeline. 2 signatures required. Daniel did not blink. He opened the next message. A reply from a real estate agent named Marcus Hale, his tone warm and efficient. He praised the property's location, its potential. He referenced urgency, the advantage of moving quickly before market conditions shifted. He mentioned discretion. He attached a draft agreement. Daniel leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes briefly. He saw the house as it had been when he was a boy, paint chipped by salt air, his father repairing railings, his mother practicing scales by an open window. The idea of it reduced to a line item did not anger him. The timing did. He opened the attachment. The language was careful, clean, legal. A transfer contingent upon medical necessity. A clause authorizing an agent to act on Margaret's behalf. The signature block left room for Daniel's name. Daniel's mouth tightened. This was not a new plan. It was mature, prepared, waiting. A knock sounded faintly at the front door. Ranger's head lifted instantly. He did not bark. He did not move from Margaret's doorway. Daniel stood and crossed the house, checking through the side window before opening the door. Emily stood on the porch, sunlight catching in her hair, her posture relaxed, a smile already in place. She wore a light dress that suggested patience and normalcy. To anyone passing, she would look like a devoted partner checking in after a long night. Her eyes softened when she saw Daniel, and she tilted her head slightly, an unconscious gesture that made people trust her. "I brought soup," she said, lifting the container. "I thought she might be hungry when she wakes." Daniel stepped aside to let her enter, then stopped. He did not move fully out of the doorway. "She's resting," he said. "She won't be eating yet." Emily's smile held. "Of course, I just wanted to help." Ranger appeared at the end of the hall, standing squarely in view. His gaze locked onto Emily, posture neutral but firm. Emily's eyes flicked to the dog. "He's still upset," she said lightly. "He needs a break." "He's fine," Daniel replied. Emily set the soup on the console table, her movements measured. "I spoke with the doctor," she said. "We should consider next steps, long-term care, professional support." Daniel watched her face as she spoke. There was no tremor, no hesitation. The words slid into place as if rehearsed. "Who else did you speak to?" Daniel asked. Emily blinked once. "What do you mean?" "About the house," Daniel said. She recovered quickly. "I was just gathering information," she said. "You've been away. I didn't want to burden you." Daniel nodded slowly. "And the agent?" Emily smiled again, relieved by what she took for agreement. "Marcus is excellent, very discreet. He understands sensitive situations." Daniel stepped back fully, allowing her to enter the house. Ranger's growl surfaced, low and brief, then stilled at Daniel's raised hand. Emily moved into the living room, her eyes drifting to the framed photos on the wall, the piano bench by the window. "It's a beautiful place," she said softly. "It deserves to be protected." Daniel followed her gaze. Protected from what? Emily turned, concern etched perfectly into her features. "From decline," she said. "From accidents. From becoming a burden." The word landed exactly as intended. Daniel said nothing. Emily sighed and lowered herself onto the couch, crossing her legs. "I know this is a lot," she said. "You came home to chaos, but there's a path forward. We can make this clean." Daniel looked at her and thought of the recordings, of the chemicals, of the pills, of the shame pressed into repetition until it became belief. "Clean?" he said. Emily nodded. "Orderly," she corrected gently. Ranger shifted his weight, eyes never leaving her. Daniel turned away and walked to the study. He opened the laptop and brought it back into the living room, setting it on the table between them. He did not open it yet. "I listened to something today," he said. Emily's smile tightened. "What kind of something?" "A recording," Daniel replied. The room went still. Emily's breath caught almost imperceptibly. She recovered with impressive speed. "You're tired," she said. "You shouldn't be digging through things." Daniel opened the laptop and turned it so she could see the subject line of the email. Property valuation. Her name sat beneath it. Emily stared at the screen. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're misreading this," she said. "I was protecting your mother's interests." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "By selling her house while she was on her knees." Emily's eyes hardened for the first time. "You don't understand what it's been like," she said. "I've held this together." Ranger growled. Emily stood abruptly. "Control your dog." Daniel did not raise his voice. "He's reading you." Emily's lips parted, then pressed thin. The smile returned, but it no longer reached her eyes. "We can discuss this later," she said, "with Marcus, with professionals." Daniel nodded once. "We will." Emily turned toward the door. Ranger stepped aside only when Daniel signaled him. As she left, Emily paused and looked back, her expression composed again. "I'm glad you're home," she said. "Things move faster when everyone's present." Daniel watched her go. He closed the door and leaned against it, listening to her footsteps fade. He returned to the table and opened the recording once more, listening to the certainty in her voice as it delivered cruelty wrapped in calm. The plan beneath the smile was no longer hidden, and Daniel had time. Daniel agreed without hesitation. That was what unsettled Emily the most. When he said yes to the dinner, yes to meeting Marcus, yes to reviewing the paperwork together, he did it calmly, without argument, without conditions. He sounded tired, defeated in a way that fit the story she needed him to tell himself. By the time she left the house that afternoon, she believed the resistance had broken. The dining room was prepared with care that evening. The table was set for 3, polished wood reflecting the warm glow of the hanging light. Emily had chosen a simple menu, nothing heavy, something that suggested sensitivity rather than celebration. She moved through the house with practiced grace, tall and slender, in a dark dress that made her look composed and dependable. She had always understood presentation. After losing her mother years ago, she learned to hide control behind kindness, to frame every decision as necessary, every sacrifice as noble. Marcus Hale arrived just after sunset. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, wearing an expensive suit that fit him like authority. His hair was neatly combed back, his smile confident and untroubled. Marcus was the kind of man who believed the law existed for people who did not know how to use it. He shook Daniel's hand firmly, eyes scanning the room with professional ease. "Daniel," Marcus said, voice smooth. "Good to finally meet you in person." Ranger lay near the doorway, still as stone, his head up, eyes following Marcus with unblinking focus. He did not growl. He did not move. Marcus noticed him and laughed lightly. "Big dog," he said. "Hope he's friendly." "He knows when to stay still," Daniel replied. Dinner began with small talk. Emily spoke about the weather, about neighbors, about how relieved she was that Daniel was home. Marcus added comments about the market, about timing, about how fortunate it was that things could be resolved quickly. Daniel listened, nodding when expected, saying little. His plate remained mostly untouched. When the dishes were cleared, Marcus reached into his briefcase and set a stack of documents on the table, aligning them carefully. "This is straightforward," he said. "Authorization, transfer, medical contingency. Once these are signed, we can move forward." Emily leaned closer to Daniel, her hand brushing his arm. "This is the right thing," she said softly. "For her." Daniel looked down at the papers. He saw his name printed neatly at the bottom. He picked up the pen and held it loosely between his fingers. Ranger's ears flicked. "Before I sign," Daniel said, his voice even, "I want to be sure we're all talking about the same thing." Marcus smiled. "Of course." Daniel reached into his pocket and placed Henry's recorder on the table. The small device looked harmless, almost insignificant against the polished wood. Emily's eyes fixed on it. She did not blink. Daniel pressed play. The room filled with sound. Running water. A voice apologizing. Another voice correcting, commanding, tightening. Emily's voice stripped of softness, precise and cold. The words were unmistakable. Marcus's smile vanished. Emily stood abruptly. "Turn that off," she said sharply. Daniel did not. The recording continued. The threats, the shame, the repetition. Emily's composure cracked. "This is out of context," she snapped. "You don't understand what you're hearing." Daniel stopped the recorder. "I understand enough." Marcus pushed his chair back slowly, his jaw tight. "You're making a mistake," he said. "None of this is admissible." Daniel met his gaze. "You should sit down." Marcus laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. "You think a dog and a tape recorder?" He lunged. The movement was sudden, violent, the chair clattering backward as Marcus grabbed a heavy letter opener from the table and drove forward toward Daniel. Emily screamed. Ranger moved faster than any of them. The German shepherd launched from the doorway in a single fluid motion, closing the distance before Marcus could complete the swing. Ranger struck low and hard, his weight slamming into Marcus's legs, taking him down with controlled force. The letter opener skidded across the floor. Ranger pinned Marcus's arm, his jaws locked around the sleeve, pressure precise and relentless. He did not tear. He held. Marcus cried out, panic replacing arrogance as he struggled uselessly beneath the dog. "Don't move," Daniel said calmly. "If you fight him, it gets worse." Emily backed away, her face pale, hands shaking. "Call him off," she shouted. "Daniel, call him off." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Daniel raised his voice once. "Ranger?" The dog released instantly and stepped back, sitting beside Marcus, eyes still fixed. Ready. The front door burst open moments later. Officers flooded the room, weapons drawn, commands sharp and clear. Marcus was cuffed, still gasping, his confidence shattered. Emily stood frozen, her explanation dissolving under the weight of evidence already in the room. Daniel stood quietly as it ended, Ranger at his side, the papers untouched on the table. The dinner to sign everything was over. So was the plan. The verdict came quickly. The evidence was too clear, the recordings too precise, the paper trail too deliberate to argue against. Emily Carter stood rigid as the sentence was read, her face drained of its practiced warmth, while Marcus Hale stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, already calculating losses that could never be recovered. Daniel did not watch them leave the courtroom. He had stopped looking at them the moment the judge spoke the final words. Justice did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, like a door closing for good. Margaret never set foot in the courtroom. She was already somewhere better. The rehabilitation center overlooked the harbor, bright and clean, filled with open windows and soft voices. Nurses moved with calm confidence, addressing her gently, never rushing her, never correcting her harshly. Her hands, once raw and trembling, were treated daily. The swelling faded, the pain eased, the fear loosened its grip. At first, she startled at sudden sounds, then only at raised voices. Then, not at all. Daniel was there every morning and every evening. He stopped wearing his uniform. Jeans replaced tactical gear. Simple shirts replaced armor. He talked about ordinary things, letting routine do what force never could. He did not ask her to remember. Slowly, memory returned on its own terms. One afternoon, she corrected him about the weather. Another day she laughed at a story before he reached the end of it. The sound startled them both, then stayed. Ranger adapted faster than anyone. At 6 years old, his movements were still powerful, but the edge had softened. He learned the building, the nurses, the schedule. He lay at Margaret's feet while she rested, rising only when she did. He no longer tracked every sound. He slept deeply. For the first time in months, his body did not brace for threat. When Margaret came home, the harbor air was clear and bright. Daniel opened every window before she arrived. The house looked different without changing its bones. Locks were gone. Cabinets stood open. The smell of chemicals had vanished, replaced by salt and wood and sunlight. The laundry room no longer felt like a place to endure. A rug softened the floor. Light filled the space without glare. Nothing demanded obedience anymore. Margaret stepped inside slowly, leaning on Daniel's arm. She paused, scanning the room as if expecting it to resist her. It didn't. Her shoulders lowered. She breathed in. "It feels lighter," she said. Daniel nodded. "It always should have." He left the forward unit quietly a week later. No speeches, no explanations. He took a role closer to home, training others instead of disappearing for months at a time. The pay dropped. The distance vanished. He was home for breakfast, home for dinner, home when it mattered. The days found a new rhythm. Margaret cooked when she wanted to, rested when she needed to. She sat on the porch and watched boats move through the channel, her hands steady around a warm cup. Some memories returned, others did not. Daniel learned not to measure healing by what came back, but by what no longer hurt. One evening, as the sun lowered and painted the harbor gold, Margaret sat at the piano. She played something simple, careful but sure, her hands moving without fear. The music filled the house softly, without urgency or apology. Daniel leaned against the doorway and listened, feeling something inside him finally unclench. Ranger lay beneath the bench, stretched out, eyes closed. He did not lift his head. He did not growl at shadows. He slept. That night, Daniel turned off the lights and did not check the house twice. The dark felt ordinary again. Not dangerous, not watchful. Spring arrived without ceremony. The magnolia bloomed. Neighbors returned with quiet kindness. Henry Miller stopped by with cookies and said nothing more than needed to be said. Margaret hugged him once, firmly, and thanked him for listening. The house by the harbor filled with light. And Ranger, his duty finally complete, slept through the night without guarding against the dark. This story teaches us that love is not proven by appearances, comfort, or polite smiles. Love is proven by presence, by staying, by standing between the innocent and the darkness, even when it costs something. Our parents and elders, who once protected us with strong hands, eventually need our attention, our patience, and our courage in return. When we ignore small signs or silence our instincts, harm grows in the shadows. But when we listen, when we act, when we trust the quiet warnings placed in our hearts, healing becomes possible. In daily life, we are surrounded by people who may be suffering quietly. A neighbor, a parent, a friend. God may not ask us to be heroes, but He does ask us to be awake, to notice, to care, to protect when protection is needed. And sometimes He sends help in forms we least expect. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need the reminder. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so more stories of hope, justice, and faith can reach those who need them. May God watch over you and your family. May He place a hedge of protection around your home. May He give you discernment to recognize truth, courage to act with love, and peace that no darkness can steal. If you receive this blessing and believe in His protection, please comment Amen.